Good morning, students. I hope everyone is doing well. So today we're going to be talking about a very contentious region in the world, and probably a region in the world that you've heard of. Okay, so why is there a Google map up? Why is that Long Island? Which is an island, by the way, surrounded by water on all sides. Okay, now, so here's Long Island. Now, we're going to be talking about an area of the world. So we scale out here, right? Here's the United States. Okay, we are going to be talking about the Middle East. So go over this area here. Okay, kind of starting down here, goes all the way around. We call this the Middle East. Reason. Okay, why do we call it the Middle East? Well, don't forget, everything is centered in Europe. Okay, Europe kind of has this God complex about itself, right? So here's Europe. Okay, so when we talk about the West, that's anything over here, right? Which means the United States, Canada, blah, blah, blah. Okay, when we talk about the Far East, once again, we're going from Europe and we're going to the Far East, and we're talking about China, Japan, the Koreas, right? Vietnam, Laos, all them, okay? So in the middle of the East, okay, so if you go middle of the East from Europe, you get this region here, okay? And it includes countries like Iran, Iraq, Saudi Arabia, Afghanistan, right, over here, okay? Syria, Lebanon, Jordan, okay? These are all incredibly important countries and probably countries that you've heard a lot about. But the one we're going to focus on today is going to be this one right here, and that is Israel. Okay, and Israel is a very important country because it has very close ties with the United States and it has a very unique past. Okay, so let's talk about the problems in the Middle East today. Okay, so conflicts in the Middle East. How does this whole thing start? Well, you got to go back a little. Okay, you got to go back to World War II. Post World War II, they're trying to sort of put the world back together. And there had been this movement, okay, there had been this sort of thing to say all the Jewish people need a country. They deserve an area or a country that is just theirs, that is just going to be a Jewish nation. That movement was referred to as Zionism. Okay, this word right here, Zionism. All right, and honestly, it's the only Z word that you ever see in Global 10, so it's kind of easy to remember that that's connected to creating a Jewish homeland. So Zionism was this idea that we need to create a country just for the Jewish people. There was also something called the Balfour Declaration. This was a statement, and actually this had happened a couple years earlier, that supported the establishment of a Jewish homeland. So now, back to this, why are we bringing up World War II? Back to this idea. I brought up World War II. What happened in World War II? Well, if you're sitting there at home going, well, Miss Jitz, there was a big war. Yeah, you're right. But something very important, something very critical that the Nazis do during World War II was the Holocaust. And you probably remember the Holocaust. That's the mass murdering of Jews. Okay, so Jews are ripped from their homes, brought to camps, and systematically murdered. So now, when they return to their homes, sometimes their homes are gone, they're burned, they're destroyed. Many of them don't want to live in that region anymore. They're afraid that, moving back to a place like Poland or Austria or even Germany, could you do it? Could you, know that your family was killed, maybe your wife, maybe your children, other family members were mass murdered in these areas. So they're trying to figure out, what can we do for the Jewish people? How can we fix this? Well, after World War II, and you can see based on the year, right, 1947, it kind of makes sense. The UN General, now remember the UN is the United Nations, okay, this is the thing that's formed after World War II, right? We had the League of Nations after World War I, now we have the United Nations after World War II. They say, we're going to take this country called Palestine. Okay, so this whole area here, prior to it being called Israel, was referred to as Palestine. Okay, and they said, we're going to take Palestine and we're going to make it into, we're going to partition it. We're going to cut it up, and we're going to take half of it and give it to the Jewish people, and we're going to take the other half of it and we're going to leave it with the Palestinians. Now, here's the thing. Imagine you're sitting at your home, all right, and you're enjoying the day and whatever the case is, and, me and Mr. Boyce comes in and basically says, or I come in and I basically say, half of your home now belongs to me. Or let's say the government comes in and says, half of your home now belongs to Mr. Kitts or Mr. Boyce. Would you be all right with that? Probably not. And that's kind of how the Palestinians feel. They feel that this is not good. And why would they want this to happen? Why would they be all right with giving up half of their land? Just like you wouldn't be all right with giving up half of your home. However, they don't really have much of a choice. So 50% of the country is given to the Jews in 1948. Now, these Islamic countries are very, very upset about this. Okay, the Palestinians instantly reject this idea, and many of the countries in the nation, in the region, okay, Egypt, Jordan, Syria, Lebanon, Iraq is right over here, Iran is over here. Okay, a bunch of these countries essentially say, no, we are not going to just simply give up our land. That's not right. And they actually threaten that if this plan goes through, they will attack this newly formed Israel. So, what happens? Well, they do. Literally, the day after Israel is formed, they are attacked by Egypt, Iraq, Jordan, Lebanon, Saudi Arabia, Syria, all invade Israel. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 countries, okay, attack Israel. Who do you think should win? Should be the 7 countries, right? But it's not. Israel is an extremely powerful military nation. Pound for pound, when you look at the amount of people that live in Israel and how tough they are militarily, they could be considered, like I'm saying, pound for pound, they could be considered one of the toughest countries and one of the strongest nations militarily in the entire world, based on the fact that they don't have a very large, they don't have a larger population as the United States, nor do they have the tech of the United States, but they're still able to fend off many countries. In fact, every single person, if you're born in Israel and you live in Israel, every single person is given military training. You're forced into military training when you turn 18 years old. For example, Gal Gadot, Wonder Woman, super badass chick. She was actually trained in Krav Maga, which is the Israeli street fighting techniques that you're trained with when you're 18 years old. Now, you can choose to stay in the army, or you can choose to then say go on to college or a career or whatever else. But every single person is trained in military training. So that means that they are incredibly powerful. So let's take a look at how this goes. Okay, so it starts off, right? This is what we see, 1947. Okay, there's pockets of Jewish settlements all around. Okay, now in 1947, once again, they come up with a plan. They say 55% of the country will now be Israel. The other 45% will now be Palestine. And they say Jerusalem, which is an incredibly important and incredibly holy city. And that's not just a holy city for Catholics. It's a holy city for the Jews. It's a holy city for the Muslims. They say that's going to be sort of neutral. Okay, that's not going to belong to anybody. Now, look at the map. Okay, look at 1949, 1967. A lot more white in there, right? And look at 2005. It is all white with the occasional pockets here. This is the Gaza Strip, but the occasional pockets here of Palestinian influence. Okay, so Israel essentially takes over the country, and Israel is now the dominant force in the Middle East. And that's going to make a lot of people nervous. So a lot of the tensions that exist in the Middle East today, so when we look at all of these countries here, right, all of these countries, Syria, Iraq, Iran, Lebanon, Jordan, Egypt, all these places here, Afghanistan over here, all of these countries are Muslim. And this country here, Israel, is the one standing Jewish nation. And that's going to create a problem. Okay, so, and it's still the reason why you have all of those issues that are going on in the Middle East today. Okay, now there's two other major events to talk about. When we talk about the Middle East, we have to talk about Iran. And Iran is a country that we've had a lot of issues with over the years. Now, prior to 1979, the United States and Iran actually had an incredible relationship. They were friends. If you went to Iran, it would actually look like the Middle East version of the United States. They did a ton of trade. They did a ton of other business together. Then in 1979, Iran went through something called the Iranian Revolution, in which they became an extreme Muslim nation. Because of that, and there's this guy, Ayatollah Khomeini, which we're going to get into him tomorrow. He's the guy who's going to make Iran into an extremist Muslim nation. That means that under their current regime, they do not like the United States, nor do they like other countries like us, like England, France, and a couple of other nations like that. Pretty much think of any sort of, excuse me, any capitalist, sort of democratic type nation. Yeah, Iran is not a huge fan of them. But then specifically, they hate America. And that's because of America's support of Israel. America has been very supportive of Israel and them being a country. And because of that, the tension has increased even more with Iran. And under President Trump, we've seen those tensions increase even further. Because obviously, partially is Trump has a lot of support with Israel, but the fact that Iran just really doesn't like the fact that they had an agreement. There was an Iran agreement, a denuclearization agreement that Trump ripped up. So you have a lot of politics that go into these things. And actually, just recently, there was a little bit of a mini dust up, if you will, where we killed one of the Iranian generals, and then they attacked one of our military bases and injured some of our troops. So you've seen escalations back and forth between the two countries. The last nation we just want to briefly touch on is Afghanistan. And you guys probably are very familiar with Afghanistan. In fact, you may know people, you may have family members, friends, things of that nature, who have fought in this country. In fact, it's believed that for a long time, Osama bin Laden was hiding here in Afghanistan, which is why we went to war with them in 2002, 2003. And we fought a very long war there. Now, prior to us being in there actually was a war, the Afghani-Soviet War from 1980 to 1988. And here's the interesting thing. It was terrorist groups like the Taliban, like Al-Qaeda, fighting against the Soviets. So basically, the U.S. supported the terrorist groups. We kind of armed people, a young Osama bin Laden, the Taliban, other Al-Qaeda groups, because we hated communism and we hated the Soviets so much. And this is kind of the Soviets' version of Vietnam, where the U.S. looked really bad in Vietnam because we lost to kind of this small nation. That was what happened with Afghanistan and the Soviets. So when the U.S. supported these terrorist groups, they didn't realize that a bunch of years later, it would kind of come back to bite them right in the butt. And then, like I said, we fight a very long, drawn-out war in Afghanistan as well, which didn't end great for us either. So that's today's lecture. Tomorrow we'll kind of get into the last two lectures of the year. That's it for today. If you have any questions, feel free to email me. This is Mr. Kitts signing off.